Ciao ragazzi, I'm Nicole with Sweet Savory Italy. Welcome to my garden here in Italy, where today we'll be talking about capers. Today we'll be picking capers and we'll go from plant to jar. Let's get started. Via! I see we already have a little friend joining us.
Can you help me pick capers?
This is one of 3 caper plants that I have in my garden, and it's probably about 15 years old. Ideally, you want to pick capers in the morning, and we're running a little bit late today, but I wanted to make sure that we had a lot of good sun for this video. So what are capers? Well, to understand what capers are, we're gonna start here with the caper flower. This is a caper flower. They're a bit unusual looking, very pretty, but definitely on the strange side. But it does help us explain what capers are. Capers are the buds of this flower. And you can see that we have buds of various sizes on our caper plant. This one is almost ready to pick. This one here is almost ready to open into a flower, so it's way too big to pick. So capers are just that. The buds of flowers that we're gonna pick before the flowers have a chance to bloom. Some of us have work on the mind and others have relaxing in the sun. Size matters in this case. We actually want to pick capers when they're relatively small if we want the best taste. If you're buying capers in the store, you have a few different options, and you also may see reference to non-perel capers. And if you're wondering what that is, it's a French word that means without parallel. And in this case, are the capers considered the most gourmet? And because we're picking and preserving capers ourselves, we have the opportunity to make them as gourmet as we want. And so that's what I'm gonna be doing. We want to choose capers that are between 3 and 7 millimeters in size. Well, we have a lot of capers like that on the plant today. And so let's take a look at what size that is and how to pick them. This is an example of a caper that's ready to pick. Now, some sites will tell you to twist off the caper. It's really super easy. These stems are very tender, and you can actually just take your fingernail and push in on the bottom and they pop right off. Because we only have 3 caper plants, I check for capers every day. And what I'm checking for is buds that are of the right size. And if they're too small, then I go ahead and leave them on the plant and wait a day or two and check again. You can see literally all these are capers. So on this one alone, we've got 5 at the top of each of these plants. And many of these are ready to pick. This one, for instance, is ready to pick. These 2 are a bit too small. So we'll want to wait a day or 2 on those. So once again, to pick, all you do, take the stem and just push in with your fingernail. It's so tender that it pops right off. This is a caper that I consider to be too large. It's really on the edge of even what you might find as a non-gourmet caper sold in the stores. So we're gonna leave that there. This, on the other hand, is the perfect size. There are just so many capers today. We really need to check every little crevice and corner to make sure we don't miss any. In fact, I like to always take a look at the plant from different directions to make sure that there are no capers that are the right size that I'm missing. Here's another example of a fluffy caper flower. It's one of 2 that we have on the plant right now. This keeps our caper plant going. Caper plants can grow on the ground, which is the case with ours, or sometimes in Italy you see them growing off the top of a wall, and in that case the leaves of the caper plant actually begin growing down the wall, kind of like ivy. I got a relatively good haul today. Remember, I'm only working with really 2 mature caper plants, and so every day I like to check to see if there are any capers that are the right size, and those that are too small I wait a day or so and let them mature a little bit more so that we can reach that coveted 3 millimeter to 7 millimeter size. Because if we're going to preserve capers, we might as well make them gourmet. Now, as you can see, these are actually really clean as is. There are many bugs that love capers, And so sometimes you will find some little insects clinging to the buds. Regardless, we do want to give these a quick rinse and dry them off before we move to the salt stage. Capers, what do we think about capers? What do kitties think about capers? After giving the capers a quick rinse, I'm just spreading them out here on a clean, dry towel, and I'll leave them here for a couple of hours just to air dry, because we do want to be sure that they're good and dry, because moisture breeds bacteria. And so while curing capers with salt or preserving capers with salt is a super easy process, it is important that we remove as much moisture as possible going into the process. The smallest capers, called nonpareils or without parallel, are highly prized for their delicate texture and are generally more expensive. The nonpareils are the smallest of the capers, and they are considered the most gourmet due to their more subtle taste and also their less fibrous texture. Let's take a look at the sizes that I picked today. Okay, so as you can see with this ruler, here's our 1 centimeter mark. And so here we're just over the half centimeter mark. On this one here, I would say we're well over the half centimeter mark. So this one's really on the border. I probably wouldn't consider it to be a non-parel. In here, we're still in the range of about 6 millimeters. So I think it's a pretty good harvest. So now I'm just going to set these capers aside to dry, the capers that I picked today. So after a quick wash, we do want to thoroughly dry the capers to prepare them for the curing process. So here's a look at 2 jars of capers that I've been working on. I started this one about a week ago. This jar I just began yesterday, and I have 2 layers of capers, which you can kind of see the layers that I've made. And I'm going to add our new capers on top of this layer of coarse salt, and then add another layer of coarse salt on top of that until I fill the jar up. So to cure capers, all you need is a clean, dry jar with a lid, the capers, which you've rinsed and dried, as we're doing here now, and coarse salt, coarse sea salt. And so the general process is to add a layer of coarse salt to the bottom of your jar, add a layer of capers, cover it with a layer of coarse salt, and continue like that until you've filled up the jar. Every day for the first few days, we want to give a shake to our capers. This helps to ensure that the salt is evenly distributed throughout the capers and that all the capers are dehydrating equally. And then return your jar to a cool, dark place. A pantry, for instance, if you've got one. Once your jar is full, your capers will be ready to enjoy in 2 to 3 weeks. During this time, the salt draws out the moisture in the capers. The capers begin to ferment, developing that delicious, salty, tangy, spicy flavor that we all know and love. And in fact, the capers tend to get better with time. And we'll take a look at what these capers are going to look like when we finish with the curing process. This jar I had been slowly filling over the course of about 4 days. When the jar was full, I began the process of giving it a quick shake every day. Salt-cured capers are ready to eat at minimum 2 weeks after you've begun the curing process. Most people want to wait at least 3 weeks in order to get the best taste. So why not eat these capers right now? They smell pretty good, strong, but capery. The capers right now are not toxic. You could eat them, but they just are so bitter and gross that you would not want to. So like olives, this is a product that you do want to cure in salt in order to develop the flavor that's a little bit more mild flavor that we know and love. Ultimately, capers are much, much, much tastier when they're cured. And so that's really the only way anyone eats them. This is a jar of capers that someone gifted to us probably about 8 months ago now. And so we can take a look at what they did and how it looks. It looks like she picked the capers when they were a little bigger. so they wouldn't technically be considered the non-Perel. Take a look at the size of these guys. Yeah, they're on the bigger side, probably about 8 millimeters, 9 millimeters, but that doesn't mean they won't be tasty. They'll still be tasty. It's just the most gourmet capers are considered to be between that 3 millimeter and 7 millimeter size. So again, this is how they look after they've been cured. So once the capers are ready to eat, which again, most people wait 3 weeks, how long will they last? Most experts say that a well-preserved jar of salt-cured capers lasts at least 6 months if you've kept it in a cool, dry location. But they can last even longer. The important thing is always smell it and look for signs of mold or discoloration. Can you open up the jar of capers as it's curing? Yes, but I wouldn't advise it unless you are still adding capers to the jar. And I say that only because at one point I was really curious in the early days when I began salt curing capers, and I opened it up and I put my nose really close to the jar, and wow, I got a whiff of mustard gas. You would not believe. So definitely the capers give off a very strong odor as they're curing, pungent mustardy odor that we love in dishes. Okay, so now, why would we want to cure our own capers? Well, capers are delicious, and in general, most consider salt-cured capers to be the tastier caper, the more gourmet caper. And that is in part because you can taste the caper better. Once you've added vinegar, that adds an entirely different flavor profile, which many don't want in the dishes when they're adding caper to their dishes. And actually, I'm in that camp. I prefer salt-cured capers because I like to taste the caper and not the vinegar. So why would we want to do this ourselves? Well, aside from the fact that it's fun, salt-cured capers, especially that non-Perel variety, are actually quite expensive in the store. And in some regions, you might have a hard time finding them because the larger capers preserved in vinegar are definitely the more common product. This is an example of salt-cured capers that we purchased at an Italian supermarket. And I can see already they are not gourmet capers. They're on the large side. They don't say they're non-Perel, as they should not. And so you can see that this is pretty much how they look if you buy them in the supermarket. They may come in a plastic jar, they may come in a glass jar, but if you buy salt-cured capers, this is how they'll look. After curing the capers with salt, some people transfer them to a salty brine solution in order to store them long term, and by that I mean over 6 months. The brine is simply a mixture of salt and water, but it can include vinegar as well. If you're storing your capers long term, you may want to put them in the fridge. This cold environment will help slow down the fermentation process. A note about salt. You always want to use non-iodized salt for the curing process. The reason that we want to avoid iodized salt is that it can impart a kind of metallic taste to whatever you've added it to. One question I had when I began curing capers at home was this: do I need to sterilize the jar? Do I need to follow that whole canning procedure that you would follow, for instance, when canning tomatoes at home or fruits? The answer is no. Salt is an extremely antibacterial environment. And so in the process of curing, the salt will draw out any moisture in the capers, killing any bacteria along with it. Just make sure that your jar is clean and dry, has a lid, and that you're starting with clean and dry capers. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and click the bell for notifications about new videos.